listening to Clarity on Fire, a podcast for people who know what they don't want out of their life and career, but aren't sure what they'd rather be doing.
In a world where it's easy to exist, but hard to feel alive, we, Kristen
and Rachel,
two certified life and career coaches, are here to help you cut through the information overload, get unstuck, and focus not just on how you can have a career you're passionate about, but how to create a whole life that feels fulfilling.
So join us here, where we serve up inspiration and down-to-earth wisdom in a way that only two best friends can.
We want you to experience the relief of knowing that, yes, you're allowed to want more out of your life and career.
And no, you don't have to wander through the dark anymore. Our job is to light the fire that shows you the way. Let's go. Hi.
Hey.
Well, we just met someone we really liked.
I just love her energy. She's very wise. A lot of good things to share.
She really just made me want to hire her as my therapist.
I just loved her. She's got this calm, very soothing
voice
energy about her.
And voice.
Yeah.
Yeah. I just wanted to listen to her and have her tell me it's all going to be okay.
I would love for her to record me a meditation in her voice.
Maybe she does.
I should have asked.
Pro tip: if she's re-listening to her own interview, most people don't do that. That's just me. That'd be a great little free download for you to offer people.
Yeah,
make us a meditation.
I love it.
So, okay, would you like to read her bio just so we know
a little bit about who she is?
Yeah.
Okay. Shira is a mindfulness-based psychotherapist and relationship expert who is deeply committed to helping people heal from traumatic experiences and turning dysfunctional relationships into secure ones. We talk a lot about that today. Shira's hybrid approach includes the Gottman method and emotionally focused therapy, which focuses on empowering couples and individuals to learn how to attune with their emotions, unhook from perpetual conflict patterns, and create a clear roadmap for resilient relationships. Shira also has a special focus on treating attachment disorders for adult children of severely mentally ill parents. Shira is a writer, podcast host, educator, and speaker. She's been a TEDx speaker and TED Women Leadership presenter and has been featured as a writer on Goop and a guest on multiple outlets and publications.
You can also find her on Instagram. This is where I found her at Shira Myrow _MFT. So
we'll put that in her bio. So,
but if you want to give her a follow, we love talking about this stuff. It's almost kind of like just three nerds, nerding out about psychological stuff.
That's exactly
what
was happening.
So,
after we stopped recording, we said, oh, that was really fun to nerd out about together.
That's kind of what it was. And it kind of meanders all over the place as a result of just nerding out. But that's why you're here, right? You're a nerd about this stuff too, for the most part.
Yeah. We had a lot of questions that came up. I was just curious. I was just really curious to get her take on things. So I'm hoping we're asking the things that you get curious about too.
Yeah.
Because we've talked about attachment styles before, but never with a therapist.
No, not yet with a therapist. So
it brings another layer of depth.
And before we jump into this interview, I want to remind you, especially because it's so relevant to what we talked to her about, that we will be bringing back Getting Over People Pleasing. Actually, do you want to give them the date that it's coming back?
It's coming back on
Friday,
August 5th.
Oh,
no.
I thought it was August 3rd. I thought August 3rd was Friday.
No, that Friday is the 5th.
Huh.
It's weird that I know that. I don't normally know dates, but I think it's because I'm going to be traveling that week. So
You're
I know
right.
the
It's
dates.
August 5th. Great. That's fine. Well, it's August 5th. That is when enrollment will be open, and it'll be open for a week for Getting Over People Pleasing. So if you want to be the first to know, if you want to get a deal on it when it opens up, get on the VIP list now. Link will be in the show notes, or you can they just go to our site?
No.
Nope.
I don't think
there's
so.
a special link.
There's a special link
just in the show notes. Okay. So that's easy. That means that's the only place you can find it. For now.
And if you're on our email list, we'll be emailing you about it today.
Well, yeah, it'll be in the email. It'll be in today's email too at the bottom. But this is so relevant to getting over
Especially
people pleasing. Like
if-
attachment disorders and people pleasing are hand in hand.
I would say particularly for people who relate to the anxious spectrum of
sure.
the attachment scale.
No, you
I'm
know
not
what?
so sure about avoidant, but I don't know. Maybe.
I
Maybe
think a lot
avoiding
of conflict
conflict.
avoidance
Yeah.
and just not wanting to engage and wanting things to just go away and not deal with them. Yeah, that's also a form of people pleasing.
That's true. And we get into the 3 different types of people pleasers in the course.
Yeah.
So yeah, depending on where you are on that spectrum, you probably fall into one, maybe all of them. I've had people tell me, oh, I'm all 3.
Yeah.
And that's normal.
So if you'd like to get over some of the stuff that we talk about in this episode, then get on that VIP list and join us
for a
for
bit of accountability to do it too, because we're going to do it together as a group, week by week.
4-week group, week by week, handhold experience where it's not too much work. It's enough work for you. It's, it's like a little side hobby for about a month that you got going with a small group of people who also want to get over people pleasing, and the ability to ask Rachel questions and chat with us in the forum for a month. And then we'll do like a live hangout at the end. Mm-hmm. So if that sounds fun, get on the VIP list, or maybe not fun, but necessary.
Yeah.
But also have a little fun.
We can do both. Both. Yeah.
You can do both. You can have fun and heal at the same time. Who says you can't?
Sure.
Okay.
It's more fun in a group.
All right. So that said, enjoy this nerding out about
attachments
theory with Shira, and we will be back at the end. Hi. Welcome.
Thank you for having me, Rachel and Kristen. I'm so excited to be with you guys today.
I am so
We're excited. We
really
care
do
a lot about this topic.
And I'm glad I think I stumbled across you on Instagram, and then I started following you. I just, the algorithm did its thing, I guess. And because it knows that we like this, I don't know, this type of work that you do. So they heard your bio when we read that a few minutes ago in the introduction. But I think that even though we've talked about like attachment theory and stuff like that on this podcast before, I think it would be really helpful to have someone who actually knows what she's talking about give us, if you can, the debrief, the sort of overview of what is attachment, and like, what is attachment theory, and maybe why do we need to know what it is?
Okay. A wonderful question, and I'll try to simplify this for your listeners. So attachment theory has its roots in an English sociologist named John Bowlby. I want to say many, many years ago, and it's evolved over the decades in terms of what we know, especially now with our understanding of like how interneurobiology works and how it affects us. But the premise is basically that we are given a blueprint in those early years by our primary caregivers. And the blueprint isn't so much, whether we're fed or not fed, or someone changes our diapers or not, but that's certainly a piece of it. It has more to do with the emotional responsivity by our caregivers, our primary caregiver. So it doesn't have to be mom. It could be dad. It could be grandma. It could be another caregiver. But the theory goes, right, that this blueprint, which is kind of formed out of thousands of cues, really, is whether you can rely on your caregiver to be there and to be responsive to you when you have a need. And that sort of creates a map in your mind that you will, so the theory goes, replay or reconstellate in your intimate relationships as adults. And so there's a spectrum, basically. There's the realm of what we call secure attachment, where you have confidence that your mom or your dad is going to come and soothe you, really, right? They're showing up for you, helps you regulate. And you can then feel, I want to say, secure in that. And eventually you internalize that. And then you feel like you can kind of self-soothe yourself, but also have confidence that whatever your intimate partner is doing, that they're going to be responsive to you as an adult. your needs change when you become an adult, but there's this correlation between emotional responsivity as an infant, and I personally feel like it kind of goes all throughout childhood and adolescent, because the cues and the needs for responsivity don't stop. Now, I want to say the insecurely attached, it sort of falls into two basic camps. I'm not going to go into all the categories, because that could be confusing, but we can do deeper dive if you have more time. You let me know. There's what we call the anxious preoccupied, anxious ambivalent, or the avoidant dismissive. And let's say the anxious baby, sometimes their caregiver comes, sometimes they don't. And that creates a feeling of insecurity. Hey, are you there? Are you coming? Are you not coming? Mary Ainsworth is famous for the strange Ainsworth test, with the 6-month-old baby, because at 6 months, they already know, well, they know that they're not an appendage to their mother, but they're starting to explore. And that's when we start to see, what those attachment patterns are starting to look like. So the anxious baby is kind of on the fence and gets really upset when mom leaves and gets really upset when mom comes back. Hey, where'd you go? And so that translates into anxious and ambivalent attachment as an adult. And then finally, on the avoidance side, the avoidant baby learns that, hey, I'm an island in this world. Like, it's not that they don't fall in love as adults, but they basically assume, okay, mom could come or not come. It's basically just me, and I'm doing this solo. And so that has implications, I think, as you grow up. And so with this blueprint, again, it's a spectrum. So it's not, I feel like, because it's become so popular and people kind of think of them as buckets, like, okay, well, that was avoidant, or, once you start learning about your attachment, you of course you want to psychoanalyze everybody, and not just your parents, but everyone And so I think on the one hand, that definition or those definitions can identify certain types of patterns that you're either experiencing or you're engaging with, especially in your relationships. But I think when you over-identify with those, and that's certainly what I do in my work as a couples therapist, you want to move towards more of those secure behaviors, because you don't want to stay stuck in those patterns, because they make us unhappy and insecure. So I hope that was...
Yeah, no, that was really good. It was a really good overview. And I appreciate that you took it all the way back to the origin, because I know that's probably where some people like, am I born this way, or is this something that was nurtured from how I was raised? So I imagine some people listening are probably they probably already know what they are, but some people might not. They might not really know where they fall on that spectrum. So if they're uncertain, like, am I in that, secure, or am I more anxious or more avoidant? What are some of the cues or signs in adulthood that will let you know which one you might be in, or what side of the spectrum you might be on?
Well, I think, for instance, let's say, well, first of all, let me caveat this, but with dating, the whole dating situation, with texting and all the, I want to say it skews towards avoidance, just in general, the ghosting, the orbiting, the submarining, all that stuff, I think would make anybody anxious, frankly, even if you were a secure dater, because people have a lot going on, and we tend to read into the subtext. This is why texting is so complex and crazy making, is because, well, what happens, if you text a cute guy that you met and, you had a fun coffee date with, and then you forgot that he was a neurosurgeon. He didn't get back to you for 2 days because he was in surgery. But meanwhile, we'll fill the vacuum. We'll fill the void with a narrative. He's not that into me. He must be seeing other girls. I actually often recommend that people talk about their texting or communication preferences when they start dating, to avoid all that, because it's so frustrating. But back to your question, Kristen. So I think that an anxious type might create a lot of narrative in between communication that is fueled by their anxiety. And they also might need a lot of reassurance. And they also might be pursuing a person in ways that will push, let's say, an avoidant type of person or withdrawing person away, because they feel like they want a lot of connection. And a lot of, again, I don't mean to get into generalities here, but there are a lot of women in particular privilege very emotionally connected types of relationships. So that's going to be important for you to have a lot of reassurance. And the fine line is between saying, all right, is this my anxiety talking? Is this something I need to self-soothe? And we do this in my work, which is, right, is this my stuff or your stuff or our stuff? But there has to be some degree of self-soothing when we move into the territory of adult attachment relationships. It can't be that sort of parentified, infantilized, okay, you need to meet all of my emotional needs, because that's only going to perpetuate those unhealthy patterns. The idea is that you can, I want to say, individually move towards security and your partner and create a relationship that feels more secure. And conversely, avoidance is going to look like not wanting to deal with stuff, withdrawing, shutting down, taking a lot of space, not communicating, and not wanting to be vulnerable, or engage in some of those conversations where you feel more exposed.
I mean, everyone's nodding right now. I know. I mean,
hello, I'm
on one side or the other. They are. Yep.
I mean, dating has been just the biggest arena in healing attachment wounds for me personally, because I've seen it play out. And then because I'm too conscious to watch it play out and then not change it, every time I have an experience, I'm then having to integrate it and learn from it. And it's like it's a boot camp. If you're doing it right, it can actually be a boot camp to get over that stuff. But good tip on the, hey, clarify your communication preferences up front so that you don't fill the gaps with a lot of unnecessary narrative.
Yes.
Like, why torture ourselves?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it really is a shame, because I feel like today's dating situation it's what we call it like relationship anarchy, right? It's like anything goes. People are, I want to say, sowing their seeds and fishing and trying new things out, which is wonderful. But I think just being upfront and communicating clearly where you are, even if you're dating multiple people, I think oftentimes a lot of people have like a don't ask, don't tell policy. They're just trying things out and trying to go slow and not have too many expectations, which is absolutely fine. But I think the more honest you can be about where you are, the more helpful it's going to be. And that also you don't set yourself up for being as hurt or for potentially hurting other people. I just feel like taking the high road. I mean, even with text conversations, this is another thing which I always encourage clients to do, which is just finish the sentence. Say, hey, you know what? I'm headed to bed, or it was great talking with you. Catch up later. Close it out, just like you would on a phone conversation. Because again, you're going to spare the person on the other side who doesn't hear from you for 2 days. Like, wait, what happened? What? We were just having a, lively debate about, I don't know what, mushrooms, and, just completely dropped out. And that, whether it's, somebody you're dating or even a friend, it doesn't feel great. So the nice thing to do would be, hey, I'm going to the gym, catch up later. That's it. Takes 5 minutes.
Like you would in a real conversation. You wouldn't just walk away in the middle of in the middle of a topic. You would close it out and move on. Yeah, we can do that technologically. I like that. Have you noticed a pattern in who tends to be attracted to who, or what kind, like, do anxious people on the attachment scale attract avoidant people, or is it more anxious, or who attracts secure? I'm just curious what pairings tend to connect if you look at it from like a wide view and look at patterns.
Oh, that's a wonderful question. Well, I want to say a predominant pattern is an avoidant with an anxious, with an anxious pursuer and avoidant withdrawer. That's a very, very common dance. But It's interesting because I've seen every which way. I've seen an anxious person with a secure person. I've seen, two avoidance is tough in the room, right? No one's talking. So you gotta poke them a little bit to get them to open up.
I can see that being a problem. No one's coming forward.
No one's coming forward. You're sort of wondering how they actually ever made it to your couch. The good news is that you can move towards secure behaviors. It's not fixed in stone. It's not like your astrological sign. You can become aware of your patterning, and then I think through all kinds of techniques. I mean, I do it through mindfulness and self-compassion. Soothe yourself to the place where you're aware, and then you can make different choices, that you're not always driven by what we call in the attachment world, these maladaptive coping strategies. And to some degree, it's not as if your behaviors are inherently wrong or bad. I don't want to give off, I know some of the literature out there makes you feel like, oh my God, now I have this problem and I'm anxious, and now no one will love me, and all the things. They're adaptive, like they're essentially adaptive behaviors that you take on to navigate through early childhood, right? Through infancy and then adolescence. They're coping strategies to deal with the family system that you're in. But as adults, and this is the other thing that I want to speak to. So, right, childhood and adolescent psychology is characterized by a kind of black and white binary thinking. And as we enter into adolescence, we begin to develop the capacity for more complexity. But it's a very, very slow process. I mean, this in the work that you do, right? You have to get people to sort of start thinking outside those binary modalities and into something that is more ambiguous. The mark of adult consciousness is the capacity for complexity, ambiguity, and some degree of anxiety and uncertainty, because that's the world that we're living in. And how do you move through that? So understanding that adult attachment when it is a little bit different. Like you do have to deal, like on a date or even an intimate relationship. It's not as if you're going to eradicate uncertainty or ambivalence or anxiety. Like those things, especially in a long-term, even secure relationship, it's going to be moments where, you're really irritated or hate your partner. And that's okay. I want to normalize that.
Yeah, it's not about being, perfectly secure at every moment all the time. Like that's not being human.
So, okay. I feel like in attachment, we talk a lot about relationships. Like romantic relationships gets a lot of airtime when we talk about attachment, for good reason, because it's like, where most of our mommy and daddy issues play out is in romantic connection. But Kristen and I, having worked with people in their careers for a decade, I believe that I am seeing it play out all the time in their careers too, especially in relationship to like a manager or a boss or certain colleagues and coworkers. I also think it plays out in friendships. So I'm kind of curious from your perspective. And again, you're not a career coach, so you don't necessarily have the same perspective that Kristen and I have, but I am curious if you were to kind of theorize, all right, how would attachment like issues pop up in a work situation? What comes to your mind?
That's first of all, I just want to say, Rachel, what an interesting, observation. I think when we talk about attachment, we are talking about intimate relationships primarily, but friendships can be attachment figures. And let's say a manager or somebody who's a mentor, could also be a kind of attachment figure. So I think maybe a better way to frame this is your communication style or your communication pattern, because you are correct, right? If you tend to run anxious in relationships, you could potentially be anxious in a lot of your relationships, around career or friends, and conversely, if you're tend to be more of an avoidant and a withdrawer. And I've seen, gosh, I've had clients, who are spectacular in the outside world in their career, so strong, so confident, just so accomplished. But when it comes down to their personal, like intimate relationship, they almost regress. Their need, like they're so vulnerable. That's really where their wound is. So I would imagine what you and Kristen are dealing with is these kind of ingrained patterns of behavior and communication. And I would imagine if you could help them to see that it doesn't really serve them, that they'd be open to changing it. Like it's not moving their agenda forward in terms of their career goals and things like that. Does that answer your question a little bit?
Yeah. I mean, I think that it's hard for me to see, like, I just see people when you're insecure or you're a really big people pleaser. To me, there's not just going to be one area of your life where that manifests. You're going to do, if you're going to do it one place, you're probably going to do it everywhere. And sure, there's probably going to be an area where it's going to manifest worse than others, or it's going to be more intense than others. But I've definitely seen people show up at work in a way that I feel like this isn't about work. This is absolutely about what happened like decades before you showed up to work at this office, and bringing, awareness to that, and then realizing, okay, what does this remind me of? And I don't need, just the awareness of it, I think is really, really huge.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's fascinating. I think that, well, I would say like the demographic that you serve, who would you say that is?
A lot of millennials, but honestly, I mean, younger and older than that too. We kind of attract all sorts around here.
It's more people who are wanting a change. They're not really happy with their current work situation for some reason. It's more like I'm ready for a transition than age demographic.
Yeah.
More situational.
It's interesting. And I do think that those types of life transitions, that kind of unhappiness, whether it's in work or career or relationship, that that's the sort of moment where, and I'm sure it's similar in the sense that now people are willing to be vulnerable and introspect and start to think, all right, wait a minute, I've been either stuck in a situation for a really long time, and now I have to be willing to make some changes or to think about what isn't serving me. My and these are those internal narratives or certain types of patterns or certain types of ideas that take hold, and then they become fixed through repetitions. That's one of the things that I find so consistently, and I wonder if you do that. We call them automatic negative thoughts, ants, but I think everybody has them, where I'm forgetting the name of the study, but it was very disturbing. It was something along the lines that I think it's over 80% of our thoughts are repetitive, which is kind of frightening when you think about it. Like we're not thinking 60,000 exciting, new, interesting thoughts every day. And of those 80% of those repetitive thoughts, 90% are negative. So think about that.
What a bummer.
Relationship. I know it's slightly terrifying. Think about, let's say, give a wide berth. Let's say like plus or minus 10 or 15 points, the vast majority of your negative thoughts about yourself or about, let's say, a relationship that's in trouble, or even about your career, if you're stewing on that. But it's the repetitive nature of it. It's almost like the banality of evil. It's the banality of these repetitive thoughts. Maybe one or two in and of themselves wouldn't do damage. But if that's what you're thinking day after day after day, of course, it's going to sort of create literally like a neural structure in your brain that you have to deconstruct. Wild.
That's probably 80% of the work that we do is rewiring those neural pathways. Absolutely.
We love ants
yeah,
now,
and I
Kristen.
think I love ants.
Love
I never heard
ants.
that. That's great.
I'm like, like, that's my takeaway. I mean, I'm probably going to have others, but that was like, oh my God, that's such a fun one. I've never even heard that before. And like, our brain is basically like just like a mass of fire
crawling around
basically at any given time. And it's so sad that it's sad, but so helpful. Because I think that knowing that depersonalizes the negativity. And so then you get to kind of observe the negativity without necessarily thinking, oh, this must be true. This must definitely be true because I'm thinking it. No, if I'm thinking it, it's probably just a repeating pattern. It might not mean anything. It might be something that just got set in childhood that literally never got reset because we never changed it. It'll just keep playing.
Absolutely. And, I'm a anxious type. And I've done a lot of work with anxiety over the years. Okay. So I see a lot of hands.
We're raising our hands. Yeah. Me too.
I think oftentimes if you're smart and you're overthinking and you're overly analytical, that can make things worse. And oftentimes I go, especially in meditation, because I've been a long time meditator, it's not so much even whether it's the thought is right or wrong, even coming back to your attachment, right? If you're noticing it and you want to sort of either beat up on yourself or despair about your relationship or your situation, it's not about whether it's right or wrong or good or bad even. Sometimes I try to shift it to, is it helpful or unhelpful? Unhelpful thought or emotion. And sometimes that gives me that little buffer of spaciousness. And that's all I need, which is to not fuse with the thought. And usually it comes with a negative emotion. And I think that is what I'm sure you guys deal with this as well with your clients, which is a thought in and of itself doesn't have necessarily a negative charge. But when it's fused with an emotion, it can really escalate and take you down with it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's helpful to, as you said before, recognize that it's more habit. So the habits might have been born a long time ago, and then your brain just gets into a loop of those negative thoughts. And then now you're just mostly saying them because that's what your brain is used to saying. So the first piece of this has to be that awareness that you're talking about. I think attachment styles helps us put awareness on it, to be able to say, here's a pattern of thought that I maybe got into that habit, possibly for good reason, for survival reasons, a long time ago, but now I've just gotten into a habit, but I can change that habit. And I, like Rachel said before, I definitely see that those habitual thought patterns that maybe started out with parents and then maybe turn into how you relate to romantic partners and then how you relate to a boss. I mean, how you relate to a coworker is that anxious style can absolutely come out at work and needing constant validation, needing feedback, feeling like if I haven't heard from my boss in a while, then maybe I'm doing something wrong, or the avoidant, right? Just leave me alone and I'm just going to do my own thing and get off my back. And right. So those patterns, that habit tends to show up all over the place. So I wonder, some of these things, just this conversation we've had so far might be bringing some awareness to people to pay more attention to those thoughts that are going on in repeat, like you said, 90% or whatever they are, they're just kind of on a loop. But because some of them are so automatic and we're not always conscious in the moment of them, because again, it's just, we got into that thought pattern. What are some things to look out for that you would recommend to say, this might be a sign that you're getting into an anxious pattern or an avoidant pattern, regardless of what kind of relationships we're talking about, romantic or work or whatever?
I think emotion is a cue. And we're taught, I think, who did I hear? I think it was like Emily Nagoski. You're familiar with her work, I'm sure, the wonderful book on burnout. And I'm not sure who she's quoting, but she said, human beings tend to think of themselves as primarily logical, right? With bouts of emotionality. And she said, actually, we're mostly emotional, with bouts of reason and logic. And I do think, especially with a lot of men coming into therapy, right, there's so much skepticism, around emotion, like that's irrational. And, my wife's irrational or my girl is irrational or, regardless of gender, oftentimes there's one person coming in feeling like they're the logical, tends to be the avoidant one. And then maybe the pursuing or the anxious partner who might feel more emotionally, I want to say, charged or impulsive. And the way that I explain it is that emotion is another dimension, an essential dimension of our experience. And we forget that emotions themselves are also part of our survival system. We wouldn't have such powerful reactions to things. I don't think our physiology, we could function the way we function. Not to say that, of course, emotionality and emotional reactivity can go very dark. Yes, we all know that it can, but we don't tend to see the value in it. And it has tremendous value and it has tremendous intelligence if you learn how to work with it. It's another part of our experience. And so I think this is where the mindfulness piece comes in for me, which is, okay, so how do you come into conversation with an emotion that's coming up for you around these quote unquote, like habituated patterns, whether you tend to run anxious or avoidant. So you kind of ask yourself, okay, so what about this? What's going on here? What's arising in my field of awareness? And of course, mindfulness is, as you know, is the ability to hold space with either the emotions or thoughts or physical sensations that are coming up in your awareness without judgment, or you're holding them with compassionate curiosity and inquiry. And so sometimes it's not to say even that you need to have an epiphany. I think some people think, well, yes, I need to get to the root of these feelings. But I think just holding some compassionate space with it kind of gives it space. And let's say it's just something like, not enough. Yeah. I didn't hear back from my boss. I worked so hard on that project. That's what's kicking up for me, right? Or let's say you went out of your way to do something special for your partner and they didn't seem to be very responsive. That might maybe kicks up some feeling of loneliness or disconnect, or wow, we don't have the same love languages. What's happening for me? And what I always invite clients to do is when those emotions come up, right? Remember the attachment patterns are coping strategies. So let's say you might feel really upset and want to, tell your partner just how upset you are with them or criticize them, or, they're not showing up for you. I would say learn how to pause there, because there's usually like two routes you could go. One is this something that's my stuff and I need to self-soothe, right? Am I superimposing my fear or my anxiety or my upset onto my partner? But you can't do it when you're in the middle of all that. You have to kind of have that conversation. And the next question I ask, and I ask couples to do this, is there some kind of right action to take? And think about what that right action is. And in the Gottman universe, I would say his golden rule is the antidote to criticism. This is my favorite thing. I always tell couples, like, there's one thing you take away, only one thing from couples therapy. May it be the antidote to criticism, which is a two-parter: gentle startup and positive ask. And the gentle startup is an affirmation and acknowledgement and appreciation, followed by a positive ask. Super important, because it's enlisting, it's engaging, it's inviting. So instead of saying, honey, you never look up from your phone, you're a screen addict, I don't know, to I so appreciate, appreciate spending time with you. It means a lot to me, and I made you this beautiful dinner, and it would mean a lot if you could be present with me while we're eating. Totally different response. So let's say your partner's more of the avoidant withdrawing. If you come at him with anxious criticism, pursuing criticism, you're not going to get the response that you're looking for. But if you're able to sort of hold that tension back to the capacity to hold the tension, which is, boy, I'd really like to know how angry I am. That's right. Your inner child or your adaptive self, or, there's all kinds of words for that, to the adult self saying, you know what, that's not the way to enlist my partner to engage with me. I need to be conscious about my language and how I'm trying to relate with him. And chances are you're going to get a better response. So that was a long way of answering that, but you can see how the in those moments, especially in intimate relationships, it's a wonderful opportunity to really change and redirect and understand that the emotion is a clue.
I love that example. I know people can relate to that example too. That was probably a common one, but it is making me wonder, because absolutely sometimes when you're having an anxious response or an avoidant response, even when you recognize it and you're aware of it, sometimes when you want to change that behavior and you want to get closer to secure, sometimes you need to make that ask, or you need to communicate how you're feeling in a productive way. But sometimes I imagine you don't even necessarily need to involve the other person. Sometimes I imagine it's inner work. It's that self-soothing talk. So how do you know the difference when it's really, this is just a me thing and I just need to get right within myself and I need to just talk myself off this ledge, or I really need to engage the other person and make this into a conversation and communication?
That I think there's some subtlety to that question, because sometimes it's a both and I think it's really hard. We're not objective. What is it? We're not objective narrators of our lives. We just aren't, right? Everything is so subjective. I do think too, it's very vulnerable to try on a new behavior with somebody who may not be able to receive it because they have an expectation of how you're going to behave. And that can feel very defeating initially. And the reason for that, right, is our brains automate. This is a Stan Tatkin idea, but it's and when neuroscience one, but we get used to the people that we're in very, very close proximity and intimacy with. So let's say at the beginning of your relationship, your brain is just, okay, what? Oh, she hates scallions. Oh, check. Like, okay, she loves squirrels. Check. Like, okay, daisies. Check. Right. But as soon as you feel like you've done due diligence and your partner, you kind of anticipate their behaviors, you anticipate their responses. So I have this situation where someone will say, hey, I made that gentle startup and positive ask, and boy, I was met with nothing. This doesn't work. So, and then you could start turning again, like feeling futile or feeling, nothing I'm going to do is going to change or move the needle on the dial here. And so I do think, let's say, if you're trying to work on your relationship, it would be ideal if your partner was also engaged and enlisted in that process. Because otherwise, and there's a term for this, we call it empathic failure, right? When your partner is failing to connect with you. And I think at that point, you really have to be vigilant about not spiraling into a negative place. And I don't know if it's the same, with work, when you're encouraging people to go out and try new jobs or try new things. Do you feel like you have to do some of that assurance for them or help them learn how to self-talk in a way that keeps them off the cliff?
Yeah, because humans are just always running up on the cliff. I feel like no matter like what the cliff is, whether it's intimate partner or whether it's job. I mean, in our case, a lot of it is like, well, I hate my job and I just have to throw everything away and quit. And like, it's like we have like a very extreme kind of, back to your earlier point, like reaction that is based in that intense emotion. And we're not introducing any space. We're not necessarily observing or reflecting or trying to self-soothe first. When Kristen asked that question, my thought was, I think it's probably always a both and. At least in that, what does it ever hurt to self-soothe ever first before you then potentially involve someone else? Maybe you don't need to involve someone else, but like, is there ever any harm in just checking in with yourself and kind of pausing and giving yourself space before you have a crazy, well, not crazy, but before you have an intense reaction or before you just take action without even thinking, that can't be a bad thing. But I think this is bringing up another question for me, which is, or maybe it's just an observation, I'm not sure, but I wonder if a lot of people, I mean, I think maybe they just don't even, they're so unconscious to it, they don't even realize that they could be creating that space before, like kind of between feeling and acting, that they could just be sitting there and like feeling how they feel. I think either people don't know about that or they're afraid of it because it's really uncomfortable. So I'm wondering, as someone who obviously has experience working with people who probably are not super comfortable with sitting with something that feels difficult, how do you typically encourage them to like weather, and maybe like learn to be a little bit more emotionally literate and like breathe through the discomfort of having tough feelings?
It's exactly that, Rachel. It is learning to sit with the discomfort. Sometimes, let's say with an avoidant, they're so shut down. Oftentimes you're going to hear them say, when you ask them, how are you feeling or what's coming up? You'll get a lot of, I don't know. Just nothing, which is really interesting because some people are so split off from their feelings and so cut off from, they can't even name them. So that's one type. And then you just sit with the not knowing. And what you'll often see is their partner might rush in to fill up all the space. But that doesn't give them any space, right? The anxious partner can't tolerate that. So they're filling up the space with their anxiety, filling up the vacuum. So we really are trying to, we talk about building the window of tolerance where you can start to deal with more, that's in trauma work, but also, with, I think affect regulation, emotional regulation is learning to deal with discomfort. And that's really so essential, I would say, as a life skill in moving through the world, which is, can you identify that negative feeling? Can you sit with it? Can you hold space with it? Is there something in there for you? And sometimes, not always. Sometimes you can't get to clarity. And I would say when you can't get to clarity, that is not the time to act. Or when you feel conversely so overwhelmed with negativity, that is also not the time to act. So that muscle of, I want to say, muscle of awareness, it really helps to have even a short practice. And I want to say, in all honesty, I know there's the 5-minute meditation stuff, and it's like, that's great if that's all you can start with. But a lot of those wonderful, wonderful effects of meditation really kick in around 20 minutes a day. So, but I start, and some people, they can't do it, which is okay. I would say, if you can start with 5 minutes and then see if you can add 6 minutes. But for some people who can't sit, I say, okay, just do a mindfulness walk and just, stop the chatter and just you're breathing, or you're 1 foot, or you're just noticing what's around you. So there's many roads into that ability to just be present. But there's a core, a self that is not so fused with all the chatter around us. And I think that is one of the massive challenges of the time that we live in, which is that it feels like we are just endless receptacles for stimulus. We can't be a minute from our phones if we're stuck at Trader Joe's in the line that reveals our phone. Like, we cannot tolerate just being in the moment. That's so hard. And so I think that if you don't understand that it's so essential to your decision-making process, to getting clarity, to understanding your emotions, to changing your behaviors, which is just presence, everything else is going to be so much harder.
And I feel like for people who aren't connecting the dots, what you're saying is the same thing as like learning how to reparent yourself. It's giving yourself that soothing and that attention and that kind of very regular meeting of my own needs that maybe the people who, were responsible for me as a baby were not able to give me. And so when we say like, I don't have time to meditate, or I don't have time to take a mindfulness walk, or other things that help kind of calm and soothe and regulate our nervous system, kind of just repeating the same patterns that the people who cared for us inadvertently, most of it I know was inadvertent. They didn't mean to mess us up, but they did. And here we are. That's why therapists exist. That's why coaches exist. We'll always have jobs. Our jobs are recession proof. Like that, I think that's what it means to be a responsible adult in an emotional sense, is like, you got to learn how to, and then step up to the plate for taking responsibility for soothing and caring for yourself. It doesn't have to be complicated. Like meditating might feel hard, but it's actually like, it's not complicated. You just sit and turn it on and listen for 20 minutes and breathe. Like that's a pretty good deal. If you want to, in my opinion, that's a pretty good deal. If you're trying to do something as complicated as learn how to like reparent myself or like rewire my brain.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do think too, I'm sure you guys have talked about this, the expectations that we have now for parenting, for relationships, even for career. And this, especially for women, the expectations have never been higher, right? We're living in this amazing time where, we're talking about designing your relationships and that the relationships, Esther Perel speaks so beautifully about it in Mating in Captivity, and we want and Eli Finkel, and we want these self-expressive relationships that are so incredibly fulfilling. But then as a parent, right? So much, it's not just, a roof over their head and get them to school and some, soccer lessons. It's like, and connection and their social and emotional development. And then you've been to therapy and then you superimpose your stuff onto them. So you're extra mindful, not to be an anxious or a helicopter or it just goes on. And then saddle that with career, which also needs to be fulfilling and rewarding and purposeful. It's a lot of stuff. And I think that there's got to be some way, some release valve to say, okay, maybe not everything all at once. We're humans, we're imperfect. We have our moments, we get emotionally reactive. We make mistakes, and there's got to be a softer way to do this, a more compassionate way to do this, so that you can still move towards the things that are important to you and aligned with your values, but not, it's even relationships. I mean, it's in constant flux. It's not fixed. And I don't think there's this place of arrival where you're like, okay, I got this. Like, even with all the theory and all the therapy and all the things, you still have to be able to have some grace and some forgiveness as you move through this process of your own personal evolution,
Thank you for calling out the fact that the expectations have never been worse or higher for just perfection, to be honest, like across the board. And I think it's an insidious kind of perfectionism because it's under the guise of like, oh, but this is about you and you feeling fulfilled. It's not even so much about how it looks. That's not, we're talking about, don't you want to feel fulfilled? Don't you want to be like the best mom that you can possibly feel like? And you want to like just squeeze so much joy out of your career. And all of those things might be true, but then the expectation that we should be there puts so much pressure on us that I don't think we actually enjoy ourselves very much in the pursuit of any of those things. I think that this is like a totally separate conversation we could have about like, no, you don't have to have it all. And you definitely don't have to have it all right now. And if you're putting this expectation of everything has to be fulfilling on yourself, it kind of brings up what Brene Brown says in Atlas of the Heart, which is you're only capable of being connected to other people, or I would say capable of fulfillment or feeling connected to a purpose to the degree that you're connected to yourself. And so if you're like dysregulated, if you're knee deep in attachment issues and you're not self-soothing, how the heck do we think we're even going to get close to fulfillment? Like, there's no way that's going to happen if we don't first kind of just take care of ourselves.
Totally. And I don't think it's true. I just want to clarify, which is that, that this is something that's been going around forever, that you have to learn to love yourself first before you can love someone else, or before someone can love you. That's not true. First of all, we don't grow up in a hazmat suit on an island. We most of us we learn to love through our caregivers. So it's something that I think it's this kind of fallacy. And to your point, Rachel, right? Like, you have to be perfect. You have to do all this inner work so that then you will be ready for a relationship. You can be all screwed up, or you can be not screwed up, or you can be somewhere in between and still do all of these things. But I'd rather the focus be on, like, coming back to the quality of presence and engagement. Because, as you said, if you're dysregulated, if you're traumatized, if you're sort of not clear, not only on who you are, but how you're moving in the world, those things, right? Joy and fulfillment, and those things are going to be hard to find, I want to say, in a sustained kind of way, because you're so disconnected from yourself. But I think the invitation, though, is the suffering is the invitation, right? The unhappiness in your job or with your career or in your family or in your relationship, that is the invitation to say, all right, so something's amiss, something feels dead, we're in conflict. It's the invitation to look at yourself with some kindness and say, okay, so what of this, right? How do we start to unpack this and deconstruct it so I can use this, right, as a potentially transformational experience to get to the next place with myself. And one other thing Esther Perel says is, I think it's my favorite line of hers, which is enthusiasm. What is it? Love is not a permanent state of enthusiasm, which I think is so great. I mean, neither is work, but just to recognize that you have to generate back to the self-soothing. You have to generate some of that internally versus expecting the world to always be providing that for you, right?
100%.
Absolutely.
I mean,
oh my goodness, yes. And a lot of people, that's the expectation, right? The expectation is that constant happiness in the relationship, constant fulfillment at work, constantly being a good parent and never losing their cool. So those moments of disconnection feel like we failed.
Well, that explains anxiety, basically. I mean, there's lots of different places anxiety comes from, but that must be one of them, is that if you have incredibly intense expectations and then they don't get met like a little bit, then all of a sudden you're anxious. When everything must come from outside in, then yeah, you're going to constantly need another source of soothing to comfort you. But if you're able to generate some of it yourself, then it's not as important that everything externally constantly provide everything that you need and be amazing.
Exactly. I mean, that's not real life, is it? That is not real life. And I mean, to your point, we live in anxious times, right? The world is so uncertain, especially now. I like to joke. It's like, if you don't have anxiety, I don't think you have a pulse, because
the last few years, for sure.
My pulse is so strong.
So truly.
My pulse is just rapid.
So I think that the ability to self-regulate, to emotionally regulate, to find some kind of ground, like, it doesn't have to be meditation or mindfulness. If it's exercise, whatever it is, to help you, I want to say, center yourself so that you can be more available, so that you can be more responsive. And ultimately, I think that's the goal in secure relationships. It's not just coming from, the chicken and the egg. It's like you're the chicken and the egg. You are a responsive partner, not just a partner who receives love and reassurance, but you now have the capacity to be responsive. So right, to love and to receive love in a healthy way. And I think that's, they grow in tandem. It's as opposed to the sort of infantile. And I think the romantic myths that we've been fed and continue to consume really distort healthy love, because it supports that sort of infantile relationship to love, that someone's going to do this for me. And of course, modern women don't think of a Prince Charming, but we have this expectation, constant romance, date nights, amazing sex, all the things. And we want to be treated with 100% equality, but keep the romance coming. But that our capacity for responsivity sort of grows with that. And it's a beautiful thing when you see couples really shift into a more adult, mature, secure relational stance. It's wonderful to see that when that happens. It's a real maturation process there.
I mean, as of this very moment, I don't have a partner, but it's a work in progress, as Kristen can attest to. We've been on the brink a couple times lately. And I want to go to couples therapy with you, even though I don't have one yet. I'm like, sign me and this future person up. I want to work through some stuff with you. That sounds like it would be a great time.
So cute. Well, I mean, and this is the thing, what the wonderful part about being around today is there's so many wonderful resources, between the Gottmans and Peril and Terry Real and Sue Johnson. There's such a treasure trove of knowledge out there. And I do think that you can do a lot of this work internally. I think we were talking with, as you said, Kristen, you can learn to self-soothe. And I think just having that awareness that we were talking about, you're going to move differently on the dating scene. You do not, but I want to just reaffirm that that's not that you need to arrive at some kind of, women tend to do this a lot. Like, I need to be perfect. I need to have worked through all my stuff. That is not true. So even if you feel anxious in this moment, that is not, I want to say, a block to finding love and connection. I don't think that love necessarily works that way.
Well, I
could be wrong.
I don't think you're wrong. I think that we see that, well, we're social animals. And I think relationally is how we work out a lot of our stuff. It's how we grow. It's how we reach new levels. And I think there is a certain level of growth that we're never going to attain on our own. And then you put someone in the arena of, oh, now I have to communicate with this other person, and they're triggering and they're bringing up all of these issues that maybe weren't really at the forefront when I was just by myself. Like, there wasn't anyone or anything to trigger this. And now it's happening. And so now I'm getting the opportunity to work through it. So yeah, I also never really bought into you have to be perfect, or you have to have like healed yourself fully in order to be in a relationship. I also think that kind of gets to a negative place of feeling like relationship is something that you deserve or you don't deserve based on work. And that in and of itself is not a great, like, foundational principle. It doesn't work for me.
Oh, it's nonsense.
Yeah.
It's 100% unequivocal nonsense. I don't know. We'd had to talk so much about this, but I feel like for a lot of women that they internalize it about their worthiness around love. And this is so interesting. I mean, why women tend to do this, and especially if I think whether you're avoidant or anxious, that could be a narrative, one of those ants, coming back to the ants. But right, is it about me? Am I worthy of love? It's not about worthiness. I don't think that's operative. It could be a distortion and like a false narrative that you carry with you to the rest of time, but it doesn't have to be. I'm really clear about that. Sometimes couples come walk into my office and I was like, how did that happen? Okay. But here they are. All right, let's do this.
I'm sure you've seen all the dynamics at this point. Proves like you can find your person no matter where you're at. and work through a lot of it together. We feel like we talked, I feel like we talked a little bit about the mindfulness and meditation piece of it, the mindfulness walks and just sitting quietly for 20 minutes. And I know you mentioned at the beginning of this that a lot of the work you do, you focus on bringing mindfulness and self-compassion. And on the self-compassion, we've talked a lot about self-soothing, self-compassion. Do you have some practices that you can offer if that's just foreign to them, right? They don't really know what that even would look like. Ways for them to start to practice that in a way where they're rewiring those habitual thoughts and feelings in a new, healthy way.
Yes. So I'm glad you asked, Kristen. I start with Tara Brach's version. She's a wonderful meditation and therapist. And if she's a great place, she has so many gorgeous talks and meditations. You can find her work online, tarabrach.com. But her RAIN practice, she also wrote a beautiful book called Radical Compassion, which was one of my favorite books over COVID. And I think that's the most, her RAIN practice is an acronym, and I'll just walk you through it quickly, but I think it's the easiest, most approachable way to do that introspection. But it's also, I've adapted it to some degree to work with emotions that way too, because I think it's a wonderful way. And let's say, hey, Shira, I can't sit. I just say journal for 5 minutes with this practice. So RAIN, remembering to think about what mindfulness is before you engage in it, right? Present, compassionate inquiry without judgment and without fusing with whatever stimulus is surfacing for you. So R is for recognize. So just recognize something's coming up. It really could be anything. And try to acknowledge or allow. So allow it to be there. And I think for many of us, we compartmentalize. We can't sit, as you said, Rachel, with the discomfort. It's too upsetting or dysregulating. But when you allow it to come, you're making space for it. You're creating a container. So there's the ego that is charging ahead in life. And then there's kind of a self that is separate from the ego that's just observing. And this is how we make that space from ego to self, right? From stimulus to awareness. That's just paying attention without judging and allowing something to come forward. I is my favorite part. It's inquiry, investigate. And since there could be so much, and I'm sure with your clients, right, there's a whole constellation of narratives and history, and this is why I have these problems, or this is why I'm not moving forward in my career, or this is why I feel stuck. So I just say, pick one. Pick one story, pick one emotion, just whatever's loudest, really, whatever's loudest, and sit with that. Some people do a more, I want to say, deeper dive, because sometimes stuff comes up. Either something that's really deeply ingrained, a fear. Oftentimes under emotion, you might have an emotion, maybe anger or irritation or frustration, and then you sit with it, and it's sadness. It's about worthiness. It's about a deep pain. It's a deep fear, and just allowing that to surface. And then the end piece is nurture. And in Buddhism, we non-attach, but nurture is the self-soothing component. So you might ask yourself, hey, what do I need in this moment? Could I just offer myself some loving kindness? Like, I'm suffering and this is hard. And also to remind yourself, my goodness, we all suffer. I think we tend to think, it's just me. I'm only me. I only suffer, no one else. And the truth is, we all suffer, maybe in different ways, but we all suffer. And then in relationships, so I'll add this. So that's the RAIN practice, right? What do I need to nurture? Go for a walk, do something kind for myself, offer myself some loving compassion. And then I think if it has to do with a relationship, that's where I ask, is there some action? Is there some right action? This is separate from Tara's stuff. But let's say when it comes to a relationship, let's say an empathic failure or some kind of rupture, is there something I need to do, a gentle startup or positive ask that might move towards repair or reconciliation or even reconnection. Um, and I find it so helpful. That's such a wonderful way to be in conversation with yourself. The last piece about nurture, and I've done this in a little bit separate than Tara's practice, but I often invite clients to give themselves some anecdotes. So you were speaking, Rachel, about reparenting. So let's say, I'm unworthy. I'll never find love. What might your adult responsive self say in that moment? You are worthy. You can express love right in this moment. You're fully capable. You're wired for love. You're wired for connection. There's no block. That block is just right, an automatic, a negative, repetitive story that you're telling yourself. So there's ways, and I think each client has. It's a kind of like that's also an undeveloped muscle, which is what could I say to myself to self to soothe, not just to offer compassion, but to kind of reframe, because that inner child, you can see like some of these stories are so old, or they're so young rather. They're so young. They come from such a young place and they're not true. And yet sometimes it's like our inner child is just driving the bus off the cliff with us. And we go there. It's like, you got to be like, okay, honey, take the hands off the wheel. I'm just going to buckle you up in the back there. So I hope that answered your question, Kristen.
Yeah. That was thank you for walking us through that and like kind of giving the visual, and like, we love an acronym, right? It's always helpful to organize our thoughts around that. Well, obviously we could talk to you about all day because there's like a million. That's a great thing about this type of work is there's an endless amount of facets that can be uncovered, but that's also why we like to parse it out, because you can't digest all of it at once anyway. So, I would love for you to tell people as we're wrapping up where they can connect with you and find you. I know you also have a podcast, which we haven't really talked about. Like, you have a totally kind of different subject matter for your podcast, which is about parenting, right?
Yes. It's called Raising Gen Z. It's on hold temporarily because I decided to direct some of my energy towards Everytown and Moms Demand Action. Since the recent spate of mass shootings, I just decided to move towards social activism, having kids, and being afraid for them to go to school. But yeah, that was a labor of love that I worked on with a dear friend of mine over COVID. So I'll keep you posted on that. But of course, you can find me on Instagram. You can find my website, Shira Myrow Therapy. And I'm always available to answer questions. I think, I guess I want to end with this. Well, first, I so appreciate both of you and what you're doing. It's so needed. I think we live in a time where there's so much opportunity, but there's also so many choices and so much overwhelm. And we need women like you helping people to kind of sift through and get clear on who they are and where they are and what they want, because it really can feel so incredibly overwhelming to answer these questions and to live these questions in constructive ways. So I just hats off to you both for doing what you do. And I really appreciate having the opportunity to be on your show today.
Well, we loved having you. And yeah, I mean, we might have a repeat guest on our hands, Kristen, because I have a feeling like we could, in a few months come up with something that we need a couples therapist particularly to speak to, and then we're going to have to bring her back.
I can already see it.
Yeah, Kristen's
it feels very likely. I'm like, this feels like an incomplete conversation, but that's just because there's so much to it. Like there's so many takeaways here that Rachel's right. We have to digest them. We have to digest them, and then I think we'll have you back for phase 2. So thank you so much for all of the wisdom that you've brought here. I know there's a lot out there about attachment styles. And so I think people have this vague understanding about it, but to go a little bit deeper and to see themselves in it and to have some practices for how to work through those triggers when they happen, I think that's really huge. So thank you so much for sharing that. I know this is going to resonate with a lot of our people.
Thank you so much for having me. It was really a pleasure. Thank you.
Okay. If you enjoyed that as much as we did, then first of all, go find Shira and follow her on all of her platforms. Also, might be a little vulnerable, but I think we can all handle this. I would love for you to leave us a comment and say, based on this conversation, what attachment style do you think you are? I have a feeling we're gonna.
And she didn't even get into like the subsets of them. She just kind of talked about secure versus unhealthy, versus like healthy versus insecure. So I think it's more accurate to say, how insecure are you?
Yeah. Are you more of the avoidant or are you more of the anxious? Because they show up differently. They're both versions of insecurity. Yeah. But they show up on the opposite end of the spectrum. So,
or are you actually one of those few people who's secure now?
And if so, what did you do? Tell us all.
I'll tell you what I did in a couple weeks. How about that? Because I definitely have. There's a way to do it that's boot camp, and there's probably a nicer way to do it. But because it's me, it was boot camp. So
all or nothing.
Yeah. Oops. Okay.
So let us know what you thought and how it resonated. And we will be back next week with kind of a special, different kind of episode.
Well, I think it'll be the same kind of episode in that it'll be us talking about something.
Well, they're used to that by now, for sure.
It's not going to be what it normally would have been, no. So,
not an interview, not some of the other types.
We'll be back with something slightly different next Friday.
Okay. I'll see you then.
Bye.